Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam de Boer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be covering the Bloc Québécois' demand for $16 billion in spending to keep Trudeau in power, the failure of the NDP's Universal Basic Income Bill, Canada's record-breaking number of international students seeking asylum, the NDP's push to criminalize residential school denialism, a Toronto school taking students to an anti-Israel march enforcing them to identify as colonizers, and the Fraser Institute study that proves Canadian state-funded media are cheerleaders for liberal programs.
Hey guys, we just launched our Everybody versus Trudeau shirts. They're 100% cotton, super soft, sourced right here in Canada, and all proceeds go to support us at Blendr News and just sort of keep this engine running. So if you like what you see, head on over to www.everybodyversustrudeau.com and get your shirt today.
All right, let's get into it. So first off, we've got Bloc Québécois threatens Trudeau with $16 billion in taxpayer funds or they'll burn his house down. The Canadian government faces a $16 billion demand from the Bloc Québécois to increase old age security, or OAS, for seniors under 75 with an October 29th deadline. Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet has threatened to collaborate with opposition parties to bring down the Liberal minority government if this demand is not met. So will the Liberals cave to Bloc demands, or should we expect an election before the end of 2024?
You won't see an election. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but you won't see an election. One of two things is going to happen. They're going to cave to demands because our country's effectively being held hostage by a coalition of minority governments that are demanding tens of billions of dollars for their own programs, none of which, when you look at a cost-benefit ratio, serve Canadians at scale. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the only reason it's happening is because the king of the minority governments that is in power doesn't want to relinquish that control. So Canada's in a bad spot. However, when it comes to this, they will cave to their demands unless they can get someone else to come to the table, like the NDP. Unless they go, well, we haven't passed that Pharmacare Act yet, have we? No, we haven't. Do you want to see that get passed? Great. So if they go non-confidence on this, because if they give them $16 billion for old people, they're going to lose the young vote. That's going to be very hard to claw back from, right? So if the NDP goes, yeah, I guess you haven't passed the Pharmacare Act. Will you promise you'll pass it? Yes, we'll pass it right away, because they've already kind of gone down the Pharmacare route, which unfortunately will cost us $30 billion a year. But what the hell? At least it's probably popular amongst their constituents. So if they can convince the NDP to jump on board to pass that, and this is just a guess, but if they jump on board for that, then they will push back against the Bloc Québécois and they won't pass this old age security thing. But if for some reason the NDP is like, no, hog off, we need to fix the mess you've already put us in, which I doubt, but if they do, then yeah, they're going to end up passing this old age security thing and Canadians are going to lose another $16 billion.
Let's think about the efficiency of this.
Oh, so yeah, no, don't even use the word efficiency in the same sentence.
Okay, because the crazy aspect is thinking about, okay, let's say you need to do something on a provincial level. Okay, the province taxes the people, that provincial government then uses it. That money has to flow through like one set of hands theoretically before it gets to its program. But then you think about where it goes to the federals, it's like, okay, that tax money has to get siphoned out of the tax base into the federal government, who then loses a bunch of it through bureaucracy costs and this and that, to give it to a provincial government, which then loses a bunch of it to bureaucracy costs again before it then goes to a program. So it's like, it's adding a whole nother step where a large degree, like, you know, we've used the number here, and again, it's more of like a guess as to, like, it probably goes one way or another, but the 20% efficiency number, right? So it's like, okay, if 80%, let's say roughly, gets siphoned off for inefficiency measures, it's like you get 20% of those taxes once it goes through the federal government's hand, and then you get 20% of that 20% through the federal or the provincial again. And so just the amount of money that gets lost along the way to feed into these programs is insane.
I mean, I'm totally on board. I see things the exact same way. I think this is a total nightmare. I think, you know, to your point about government efficiency, here's a good calculation to share with people so they can understand. Because I've had a lot of people go, no, pension money's going to the old people. That's that. 100% it is. They're taking it from us to give it to them. Okay, so when you look at the Canada Pension Plan, I think we've gone over this before on the podcast. the average, this is Fraser Institute numbers, the average person over 40 years, as of today's numbers, I recognize the changes over time, but you're going from today's metrics, they will pay $151,000 into CPP. Now they'll start collecting it when they're 65. They have to live to be 82 years old, on average, 82 years old, to get all their money back, to get $151,000 back, and then they can get a little more if they live a little longer. Basically, it's no ROI, right? Now, if that money, and you and I did this calculation, if that money was put into an index fund with an 8% annual return, which is reasonable, that same $151,000 put in at the same schedule as if you were paying CPP would equal $1 million the day you retired at 65, just over. So everybody could retire with $1 million. Instead, they have to live to be 82 to get back 151. But here's why this is important. Forget about how long it takes you to get your $151,000 back. Let's just say at 65, you're guaranteed just your 151 back, which again, you have to live 17 years, which is beyond the average length of life in Canada. But let's say you get it back. That means that if it were to be $1 million, 85% of it was now taken by the government. The other $850,000 that you should have had on day one, the government has taken. So when we say that their efficiency is 20%, when it comes to the Canada Pension Plan, it's not even that.
And the steelman for the argument on their side would be that, well, if you don't have any pension program in place, people won't make those smart decisions along the way because they'll make those. Most people are driven by short-term incentives and they don't plan that far ahead. So then we'll have a mass crisis once people go to retire and they didn't actually save appropriately. But this is where I think that argument is really good for the fact of like, it's one thing for the state to require people to undergo something like, say, for instance, having car insurance. And it's another thing to say that the state should provide that they should be seeing that program. So you could have something in place where it's like, okay, whatever, what would be CPP percentage that gets taken off of a paycheck?
I've been self-employed for so fucking long, I don't even know.
The CPP contribution rate is roughly 5.95% of their yearly 6%, earnings. Yeah. Okay, so you require people to invest 6%, but then you still give them the choice of where into their future.
Yes. Now you're talking apples and apples.
Rather than being like, we're going to take 6%, we're going to do what we want to do with it. It's
yes.
like, no, you have to use it towards this purpose, but you get the choice as to how to do so.
Exactly. And people are like, well, no, it's a straw man argument, actually. Yeah, I agree with you steel manning it. When someone says it to me, I'm like, bro, that's a straw man argument. Give me apples and apples. The investment's being made. That's what I'm talking about. Not, oh, you spent it on a new TV. Fuck off. It's so I agree. Anyway, when it comes back to this issue here, look, that's kind of the way I see it. If they can't corral the NDP in again to get them hooked on the idea that pharmacare won't pass unless they support them through non-confidence issues, then they will go with the Bloc here, and Trudeau will continue to maintain his power. Because the reality is, when you look at the landscape right now, nobody really wins other than the Conservatives at this point against all parties. All parties are down from where they were even a year ago and from the last election, other, of course, than the Conservatives. So it's not really in anybody's interest. And all those guys are on one team, right? People are like, oh, well, we have 4 parties. Well, currently you've got 3 against 1. That's what you have. And those 3 are the ones that are in power. And those 3, none of them benefit if this gets pulled. So they're going to find a way through this. And yes, it will cost Canadians probably another $16 billion. All
right, moving on to our next story. We've got NDP's push for universal basic income being crushed in the Canadian Parliament. An NDP-led bill for a universal basic income supported by leader Jagmeet Singh and MP Leah Ghazen was rejected after 83.5% of MPs voted against it in its second reading. The bill for a framework for a guaranteed livable basic income aimed to provide income for Canadians aged 17 and older regardless of employment. However, 273 MPs opposed the proposal, while only 54, including some NDP and Liberal members, voted in favor. Critics such as Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation argued it would cause tax hikes and harm businesses, stressing affordability and tax cuts should be prioritized. So is this a rare display of political sanity in Canada?
Yes and no. I mean, ultimately the result is yes. However, I don't know if we got here because the NDP is no longer being supported by the Liberals. I also don't know if we got here because everybody knew it was going to flop no matter what. And the NDP just put it out once they cut ties with the Liberals to sort of appeal to their base. I don't really know. Terrible, terrible plan that would have absolutely buried the country economically. just a wild misuse of funds if they went down this road. And we've done the math on it. There's no way to cover the cost. That being said, this was one of the things that I was considering as a last-ditch effort or a final tool in Trudeau's belt to try to maintain power, because he could get all the way up to the election and then he could be ruining the economy and say, hey, we're going to give you universal basic income. And what that means is now you can all pay your bills. So he would just basically absorb the vote for most people under 40 because they could afford their life again for a little while, because it's a really bad hamster wheel. But anyway, the fact that 83.5% of people voted this down, which is great, so what should have happened, is good for two reasons. Obviously for the Canadian economy, but also it really takes Trudeau's last big opportunity to fight for power away from him, which is good.
Do you think those 16.5% that voted in favor actually, do you think they actually believe that this would fix the economy and the cost of living crisis and all of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, these people are idiots.
Because I honestly can't. It's almost scarier to imagine that there is people in high levels of government that are that economically illiterate and incompetent, rather than imagining that these people are actually smart, but just say have malicious intent or just want the power and control. But it's like, I don't know, what's scarier, that they would be so dumb to support this or that they'd be more evil to?
Well, the thing is, I was looking at this graph the other day and I can't really speak to how true it is, but like the average IQ in Canada is around 100.
Yeah.
Right. So that means half the people you see have an IQ under 100. That's what that means effectively. Right. And then you think about the people in government, a special type of person. Now, some are very, very intelligent. Absolutely. Half of them, I'm guessing, are not, just based on the statistics. And I would be assuming that there's a certain portion that belong to different parties. Like I'd say there's more in this party than that party. I'm not going to say which party.
Green Party.
But I'm just, again, just a wild guess. So yeah, look, half these people are morons. Sorry. It is what it is.
It's that George Carlin quote where he says, if you want to know how stupid people are, picture how stupid the average person is and then realize, 50% of them are dumber than that.
Right. So, well, the thing is, you see like, you're going to get onto it later. Actually, no, this one works. You see the woman who suggested this, Leah Gazan, right? I looked through her economic strategy for this. And there was literally no plan. There's nothing other than, we're going to go chase down the tax dollars we haven't been able to get our hands on yet. And I'm kind of going, well, look, if that's your plan, why don't you already have those tax dollars? There's nothing here. This doesn't make any sense. They also dramatically underestimated how much it would cost. By my math, it was about twice as much. And here's the thing. When you start giving away free money, more people line up. That's how all of our social programs work. So no. Like these 16.5% of these people actually think that this is the way, right? But I think a lot of it's a combination of being dumb, but also being idealistic, right? And I think when you're young, you're idealistic more than you are dumb. And as you get older, if you sort of maintain that idealism, well, then you're the one I can point at and say you're dumb, right? And I think that's just kind of what you're seeing, unfortunately. But look, at the end of the day, it'd be great if everybody had enough to have a good life. That'd be amazing. Our governments are the ones that are ruining it right now. So go look at them.
So one thing to keep in mind too, when people like her say, oh, well, we'll just make extra efforts into collecting the taxes that are already slipping through the cracks. If you go look at, and this is the same across pretty much all countries, if you go look at even the IRS or the CRA and who they audit, they overwhelmingly audit low-income earners because those people don't have the resources to fight back.
Yes.
And so, okay, we can't go after the billionaire because he can tie us up in court for years and it's going to cost us $5 million or $10 million, whatever it costs to carry out this investigation. But that person that isn't claiming their tips, we can just toss a tax expenditure at them. And they have no choice but to pay it. But where I was kind of going with that whole like incompetence versus malice and thinking about, okay, are they just genuinely that stupid. And you know, you use the word idealistic, and I think those are kind of two in the same things. It's not even like idealistic or stupid. They're just like, some idealism makes you stupid.
Oh, I think when
because
you
can't bend.
I agree, but I wanted to give some credit to young people that just don't have all their faculties there yet. And they're not dumb.
Yeah.
They can be in Harvard, but be overly idealistic.
Yeah.
So I give it it's like a intelligence meets experience.
Yeah.
And then I think you shed the idealism.
You know what I think maybe the distinction to make there would be the difference between, say, intelligence and wisdom. Because in that scenario, somebody can be really intelligent and idealistic and do very unwise things like what we're seeing in these, in these scenarios. But this is something that C.S. Lewis pointed out, where people that believe they have good intentions, like, you know, we can assume these people do, thinking, okay, well, if we just do universal basic income, then there won't be anything such as poverty. This C.S. Lewis quote just perfectly encapsulates all of that. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. And that's exactly what you see here. Is just
that's the Liberal Party and the NDP Party right now. They're basically like, we're going to fix all your problems. You need us. You need more of us. You need bigger government. Give us more of your stuff. We're going to sort it all out. We are democracy.
They're that picture of that old famous movie from like the 80s or 90s. I can't remember the title of it, but it's the woman standing there with the gun and the syringe being like, we're here to help you.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. Yeah. So this is definitely a win for Canadians. Not really too sure why we got here, but it is a good thing to see. And I think it does remove a potent weapon that I thought Trudeau still had in his arsenal to maintain power. So overall, good situation.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next story, we've got Canada sees record high asylum claims from international students. In the first 8 months of 2024, nearly 13,000 international students in Canada applied for asylum, representing 10.8% of the total nearly 120,000 refugee claims made during that period. This marks a significant increase from the nearly 5,000 asylum applications from international students in all of 2022. Reflecting a 2.65-fold increase. A plurality of these students come from India, with nearly 110,000 study permits issued. Despite concerns about the misuse of the international student program, the Trudeau government has only modestly reduced the annual cap on study permits and has continued to issue a high number of permits. In 2024, Canada approved over 215,000 study permits in the first 5 months, compared to 200,000 in the same period in 2023. So how long will it take to fix the problems that Trudeau has caused to our immigration system?
It's interesting, right? There's so much damage that's already done because of the volume of people. So when you just talk about the immigration system itself, you know, you could implement new policy. They're clawing back a little bit right now. They know they are, because they're losing votes because of it. So they're starting to claw back. And I think once the Conservatives get in, if Poilievre is able to stick to his word there, and the Senate doesn't get in his way, he wants to tie immigration to infrastructure, which is the only thing that makes sense. It's just best for everybody, best for new immigrants, best for Canadians, best for the economy. That's just the best thing to do. Which you and I both know means curbing it for a while, cutting it down pretty significantly for a little while, a few years. But whatever it is. So in terms of fixing the system itself, it's still going to be sort of wrought with corruption. You and I know that it's been infiltrated by some foreign governments, India, China, stuff like that, Russia probably as well. So that kind of stuff I think is hard to get a handle on. So I think there's always going to be a certain amount of, it'll be compromised no matter what to a certain degree. But in terms of macro part of it, at scale, Liberals are clawing back, Conservatives get in. I think they can repair the system. Now, the bigger question is, how long does it take for Canada to balance the mess that the Liberals and Trudeau created for us with the open border system? I think that's a few years. I think you're probably looking at 3, 4, maybe even 5 years before we balance out from this.
because this is what I think about. It's a lot, the time and effort to put into destroying something, into building something are two completely different things, right? Like if you have a house, you can wreck it in a matter of hours, but to build a house takes months, right? And that's the same kind of thing with this immigration policy. These immigration policies is Trudeau has wrecked that foundation, but it's going to take a lot longer to refortify it.
Yeah, I mean, we're on the same page here, but to the point about the asylum claims, none of these international students need to be seeking asylum. They already have student visas. They're just exploiting a loophole in the system. So this is a total disaster. These people shouldn't even be able to apply for it. It's crazy to me.
You see them protesting and saying that we need to fix our immigration system to accommodate them because they feel exploited by these programs, right? And I think there is actually a genuine argument to be made that these people are being exploited by the people who benefit from these programs, like the diploma mills and such. But think about like how insane that is to sign a contract that says temporary foreign worker or temporary student or any of these things, and then get there and start complaining and being like, you guys aren't allowing me to stay here forever. It's like, that was never part of the agreement you signed on for.
It's just sort of become the way, though. Once they get into this country, there's like, oh, there's 5 or 6 avenues we can exploit just to stay here as long as we want. No problem. That's it. That's exactly what they're doing right now. So yeah, I mean, that's all got to change. So I mean, I think that's also part of the fixing the immigration system. And I think you sort of look at it from a few angles. But again, liberals are trying to claw back. It seems like they've created such a mess for themselves. They're sort of in this damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, especially with this kind of stuff. But
with the clawing back thing, like I wonder, I would want to maybe take a look at the exact numbers. But is it one of those scenarios where, let's just use arbitrary numbers for now, when the Liberals took hold, we were issuing 100,000 study permits per year. And then they opened the floodgates and started allowing, say, 500,000 people per year. And then they're like, well, you know, we're going to claw it back and we're only going to allow 300,000 people from now on. It's like, yeah, but that's still a 300% increase from when you took office. Yeah. Despite the fact that you are still clawing back from your just more radical position.
I think what they had to do was, I think they had to curb it by a minor percentage to show people they're moving in the right direction. So they're like, no, the liberals aren't. Everything's fine. They're moving in the right, they're moving the needle in the right direction, not actually fixing the problem. I don't think politicians actually fix the problems. I think what they do more than anything is go, how do I get reelected? Once I've created a mess, I can't admit that I'm wrong. So how do I patch this up the best way possible? Again, without taking any accountability.
Okay, so yeah, here's the numbers. So for 2014, the number of international students in Canada admitted to Canada was 330,000. In 2022, it was 670,000, so almost 100% increase. And then what the Liberals are scaling it back by is 35%.
Right.
So exactly what I was saying. Is it's like, oh, yeah, we lit this house on fire. And hey, guys, we're going to stop pouring as much gasoline on it.
Exactly. They're like, we're moving in the right direction. Everything's going to be fine. Based on our immigration numbers, we have to build 600,000 homes a year just to keep up with immigration. We're building about 250. Cool.
And what's insane is you see people like, for instance, the Trudeau administration claiming how the Coutts border crisis and stuff like that was going to damage issues with U.S. relations and using that as a pretense to use those wartime measures and such, right? And crack down and go in there with the jackboots. But then you look at what their policies are causing, which is more and more illegal immigrants at the Canada and U.S. border. Like we're seeing, for instance, advertisements being made on TikTok telling people how they can, say, use Canada's student program, come here, and then how to get illegally into America from there and use us as like a landing pad, essentially, to get into America. And then so you're telling me that, okay, you needed all these measures to make sure your relations with America were good, but meanwhile, you're facilitating a program that is allowing illegal immigrants to flood into their country.
Yeah, so these people on TikTok are actually, they're like tour guides.
Yeah.
Come with me, pay me $5,000, I'll get you into the United States. Apparently it takes about an hour and a half. That's their whole shtick. And it's like just around, I guess, around Niagara. They're in different pockets, right? Whole thing's absolutely insane. But also the US is pretty pissed at Canada right now because of how many potential terrorists or whatever, people on watch lists are actually getting through the northern border in the United States. And they're like, hey, if you don't tighten this up really quick, we're gonna have a pretty big problem here. So it's literally it's the complete opposite. They've actually got a big issue on their hands because of the rampant immigration.
Although, you know what? I guess my argument there would be like, it's justified. It would be justified for the American government or security bureaucracies to be upset at that if we were facilitating that and allowing that to happen. But when they're just allowing people to flood in their southern border and then be like, you've got people flooding in one door, you're purposely allowing them to at this point. And then you're like, this other door, people are coming in. You're like, hey, fuck you, close that door. You're like, yeah, but
I think a lot of this, again, is about diplomacy, not about reality, right? Because I think that they believe they can have a different conversation with the Canadian government than they can with the Mexican government, considering much of the Mexican political system is infiltrated by cartels. So what's that conversation really look like? Also, like, I agree with you. They're letting them in. They're just letting them in. They're pouring in from prisons in through from prisons from a bunch of South American countries into Mexico, into the States. That's a total disaster. The people coming from Canada, it's significantly less, but it's almost like, imagine you have two kids. One of them's emotional and responsible and he takes care of things. The other one's a wild kid that's just running around naked causing shit all the time. You know what I mean? So from the wild kid, you're like, at least he's got pants on. You know what I mean? Right? So, but from the guy that's responsible all the time and takes care of things, if he does something that's kind of off base, you're like, hey man, I expected an A from you, not a D-. What's going on here? You know what I mean? You kind of change your expectation based on the individual. True. So
yeah, you have higher expectations.
Exactly,
so
exactly.
That makes sense. But then again, the same, say, Sinaloa cartel that is exploiting the American southern border is also exploiting the northern border. So we've just allowed them, like, I think at one point the number was the Sinaloa cartel was making like $2 million a day in Canada. And then you also...
I need some of that cartel money, bro. Fuck. This is stupid.
You think about that. That's an insane amount of money. That's what, 725-ish thousand, or sorry, 725 million-ish a year.
Well, you said 2 million a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So around, 2 million a day.
A day. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So
no,
yeah,
around
like
there.
725.
Yeah. I would say you take a bit of time off for Christmas. Yeah. That's the math is good. Yeah.
But so like they're almost making $1 billion a year up here. And then you factor in that look at what happened with Luke Sabrin, right? Who was the whistleblower pointing out that the cartel, that the CBSA just turned the other way when they found that the cartel was...
Because they're eating some of that cartel money that I'm talking about. That's it. That's what's going on. Jesus.
All right, moving into our next story, we've got NDP tables bill seeking to criminalize residential school denialism. NDP Leah Gazin has introduced
busy girl these days.
She is insane, dude. A bill to criminalize the denial, downplaying, or justification of the harms caused by Canada's residential schools, similar to laws against Holocaust denial. Gazin, whose parents survived the Holocaust and Indigenous trauma, argues that denying this history harms the survivors and their communities. This bill would make it illegal to promote hatred by condoning or denying abuses suffered by Indigenous children in residential schools, which operated for over 160 years and claimed over 6,000 lives. Those supported by some political figures, including AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse, the bill faces uncertain prospects as private members' bills rarely pass. But despite this, it does show the insanity of some of the people that are in our government. So how many different ways is freedom of speech under attack currently in Canada?
Well, I think a good thing, like a good rule of thumb, is to understand that freedom of speech is always under attack by the government. Mm-hmm. This is just where we are today. It doesn't always have to be like this. But until something dramatically changes, it's always happening through every medium. It's always under attack, right? For me, this is a bit ridiculous. Look, I think that, we can agree that residential schools represent a dark chapter in Canadian history, regardless of how you skin it, regardless of how these kids died and how they, it was terrible, right? Like you're basically trying to force assimilation to Indigenous people, to a culture that, to your own culture, right? So I'm on board with being like, yeah, this is horrible. However, criminalizing this so-called residential school denialism, obviously it's a step too far. I mean, first, like you said, free speech shouldn't be outlawed even when it's uncomfortable. Ever. The idea that you can't challenge these things is absolutely bananas because of people that are alive today that weren't there. You know, I think some residential schools went into the 60s. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So like, but even if they are, it's like, look, I feel the same way. I'm sorry, I'm kind of butchering this, but I feel the same way about the Holocaust. I do. Like horrific events. And if people, no, but look.
They are different. They're very different.
They are, but they're not in this. If you want to deny that they happened, then you're an idiot. But that's your MO and that's fine. Telling people they can't ask questions or they can't deny that it happened, that's like saying you can't have stupid people or you can't have your own opinions about things. You can't mandate the truth on history by law. That's fucking insane. That's my point. I think both these things happen. The Holocaust was horrific. I think residential schools are horrific. Doesn't mean I don't think anybody should have a different opinion. Doesn't mean I don't think people should be able to have a different opinion. That's how I feel about it. I think it's absolutely bananas. But also with this specifically, the term denialism is being thrown around too loosely, obviously, because we've seen it apply to situations where the facts aren't clear, such as mass graves. There's been no children found. Again, not taking away from how horrible this thing was and how they were treated, but there's no mass graves. There's not one body's been found, and they've spent tens of millions of dollars on this. So telling me I can't deny, well, which is the truth now? Well, now you're the purveyors of truth, of history, when I can already objectively tell you that it's false. So what kind of situation are we getting ourselves into? I just think you should never be able to mandate something like this. It's absolutely bananas to me.
Well, see, and this is where it gets to, is because you and I feel like, have a very realistic view of this scenario. And both of us do land on the side that these residential schools were immoral and should have been ended. But yet, because, say, for instance, and I'll make this argument, but my argument would be considered denialism under their standards, because I don't think it's as terrible as they said it was. We need to be very careful about the fact that not everything just all of a sudden goes into this basket of genocide. Like, I'm sorry, when it comes to this residential school, it was 100% indoctrination, and I'm not down for that. Like, hell, I make arguments against state schooling across the board.
100%.
So
I'm not even putting my kids in state schooling today.
So you can imagine that I am very against taking Indigenous kids and forcing them through 100%. Forcing them through these schools. But because you know that, again, these things get classified in the same section as things like the Holocaust. You can see them constantly saying, well, residential school denialism is akin to Holocaust denialism. And I don't think either of those things should be criminalized. But there is a very large difference between, like, the vast majority of Indigenous deaths when we came over here were from disease. Like 90% of the Indigenous deaths were from disease. And there is a very big difference between, like, moral difference, and they're both terrible. Like, that's not something anybody would wish upon a type of a group of people. But there's a very big difference between corralling people into concentration camps and gassing them to death and then disposing of their bodies in ovens, than to land in a place with germs that type of people have never been exposed to and don't have the immune system for it, and then your very presence ends up killing them. That's non-intentional in that 90% range.
Right.
Like, even in the book, The Empire of the Summer Moon, he shows how a lot of these army commanders and stuff for the colonies, when they were here, they didn't even know why all these Indigenous people were dropping dead. And they were like, because they hadn't discovered germs and stuff at this point. And it's wild to just think that this was their frame of mind. But one of the guys was like, oh, you know how I know God is on our side is because we don't even have to defeat our enemy. He's defeating them for us. Like, they just thought God was, like, paving the way for them. They didn't understand that it was their germs.
Illness.
And so, like, those two things, like the Holocaust versus mass Indigenous death, and don't get me wrong, there was battles and there was actual, but there was warfare between the two groups. But it was nothing like what happened in Germany. And so, like, for me, this whole idea that, like, as soon as any group persecutes any group, it's the exact same as this. Like,
oh, so your issue is them using the comparison because they're putting it in the same category. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. For me, again, like, I agree with what you're saying totally. But free speech absolutist. I can't. I think they're both. I think criminalizing denialism for either is wrong.
Well, yes, and that's where I 100% agree that yes, you should be able to voice those opinions. I think the person who made the best argument for freedom of speech and was actually foundational to the West for it was John Stuart Mill, and he said, if all of mankind minus one were of one opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had all the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. The peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race. If wrong, they lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth. So it's like if somebody says a wrong opinion, you have the true opinion, you can put it against theirs and it actually makes yours look stronger in comparison to everyone else because it has seen it stand up to criticism.
Well, the whole thing is you beat bad ideas with better ideas. Bottom line. If this is true and you want to have a conversation with someone that thinks it's not true, and for some reason that's important enough to you, which I really think you shouldn't give a fuck about other people's opinions, but cool anyway, if that's what you want to do, just use your better ideas. Just beat them there. Cool. Job done. They look like an idiot. You win. It's like in a society where free speech sort of thrives, good ideas always rise to the top anyway, right? So, I mean, for me, again, I can appreciate the comparison that you made in saying, hey, these are nowhere near the same thing for a number of fundamental reasons. But again, across the board, hands off free speech. Enough.
All right, next story. Outrage ensues as Toronto's school trip becomes an anti-Israel march with children forced to identify as colonizers. On the same day as the controversial Toronto District School Board, or TDSB, field trip that devolved into an anti-Israel rally, Education Director Colleen Russell-Rollins quietly went on leave, leaving behind a school board in chaos. Her focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, and poor oversight led to a September 18th field trip where third grade students were forced to participate in political activism. Labeled colonizers in blue shirts, students were made to chant anti-Israel slogans, shocking many parents. Jewish students who objected were dismissed, and some received stickers with phrases like Zionism kills. Despite public outrage, the board downplayed the situation, sparking calls for accountability, including firing the teachers involved and appointing a provincial supervisor. So can the school system be saved at this point, or is the ideological rot just too deep?
This is wild. Dude, did you ever think that you would see a time, especially while you're still a young man, where you would see this type of anti-Semitism inside of public schools? Wild. In the West. Wild. This is insane to me. And, you know, just to sort of play devil's advocate, how come no one's having the Islam kills conversation if they're going to be doing one or the other, especially if you look at things historically? I think they're both, you know, I don't want to go down that line, but I just mean, you know,
again, just Google the largest terror groups on the planet,
the top 20
and what their ideological affiliation is.
The top 20 are all Islam. It's like
top 15, out of the top 20, 15 are about Islam, 5 are about Marxists.
Right. So there you go. This is wild. So anyway, sorry, the question was, can the public school system be saved, or is the rot too deep? Public school system is this sort of ever-changing, growing, sort of got a life of its own. At this point, it's kind of a bacteria, but you know what I mean? So it can be saved. It's just that here's what it's going to take. It's going to take a very strong, competitive, parallel education system. So you need a lot of people to break away from this system, to force it to sort of correct course. I think that's the only way, because when you look at it from a political perspective, you can have a conservative government and they can tell you whatever they want to tell you. Now, a lot of the educational stuff is handled at the provincial level. We have a conservative government here, and look what's happening. So you have to go a little deeper. And like I always say, if you want institutions to work, you got to work for the institutions. The people working for these institutions in the United States, it's 90% Democrat, 10% Republican. And here, I think it's probably like 95-5. That's what it is. And maybe not today's conservative liberal split, because things are a little wonky, so a lot of people are voting conservative, but I mean, came up through the system as liberals. So it doesn't really matter what you do from the top down in this organization. It is rotten. So I think, like I said, the only way, in my opinion, to fix it is to create a really strong parallel education system that forces this other one to go, we got to up our game, or we have to change, or we have to at least stop with the ideological nonsense, or there's not going to be any students left here.
Well, it's one aspect is, yes, okay, it's crazy that these teachers are just getting these slapping Zionism kills stickers on children. Like they should not be exposed to this. They should be learning how to write and read.
Yeah.
But
forget all that shit. Pretty sure that's racist, dude.
Yeah.
This isn't racist. That's racist.
Yeah. Fuck. But look at what
oh man.
But look at what happened in Mao's Cultural Revolution was he radicalized the youth during with what he called the Red Guards. So he told the kids, like, the most virtuous thing you can do is to become an activist against the oppressor class. And that's exactly what you're seeing pop up in these students, is being like, oh, hey, you know, being a competent person that, yes, can say do math without struggling and their brain falling apart if they don't have a calculator in front of them, or being able to handwrite, or any of these kind of like simple tasks that we should all be able to do. Don't worry about that. You need to tear down society. That's what makes you a good person. And then that's exactly what he did. He radicalized this youth against the quote unquote oppressors, and then got them to attack what he called the four olds, which is old custom, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. And the whole thing was just like, okay, let's tear down this oppressive system. And that's all rooted in our tradition and everything about, you know, we see it with Western nation, right? Is anything that resembles the West is colonialism or oppressor or racist or blah, blah, blah. And then now you're just openly weaponizing these kids against that quote unquote structural racism and oppression that you keep trying to point out.
Well, we talk about where the teachers are at today within the system and how it's rotten, how to fix it, right? We say, okay, maybe some of them vote conservative today because they see how screwed up things are, but they came out through the liberal sort of within or under the liberal umbrella, right? Look at the umbrella these kids are coming up under. Where do you think they land in 20 years? Because it's not a good spot. None of this serves these kids well in the future whatsoever. Like, that should be the primary metric when you're teaching or talking to a student about anything in school. Is this going to serve you in the future? That should be the first filter you work through. Will this serve you in the future? Nope. None of this will. How about the gender ideology stuff? Nope. How about saying math is racist? Nope. None of that. All of that is fucking nonsense. None of that will serve this generation. All of it needs to go. You know, it's just insane to me that we're at this point, because here's the problem. I say this, I think a lot of people do. Give them an inch, they take a mile, right? These people were allowed to have, they were allowed to teach this radical nonsense to kids over the last 5 years. Just keeps getting worse because they don't have a goalpost. It's not, well, I just want to teach them this one thing. I want to teach them that it's okay for boys to be girls and girls to be boys, and they should make that decision when they're 8. That's fucking wild. But that wasn't their goalpost. It's, let's get more radical. What's the next cultural issue? All it was this cultural poison that's now within the four walls of the education system. And it doesn't matter what it is. As soon as it hits that, as soon as it jumps in and becomes the cultural issue du jour, bang, they want to teach these kids this nonsense. And it's just becoming more radical.
And again, this all comes through the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, right? Which is a large umbrella, and that also factors in, say, the LGBTQ and like the queer agenda. And I recently wrote an article on our Substack about that. But one of the things that these people believed was that even the very concept of the childhood innocence is a oppressive social structure. So you need to break these children out of that. You need to essentially thrust the world upon them and destabilize them in order to raise their consciousness in order to fight these things. It's actually insane. Like, when you look at what these people say, they actually believe that they should put kids through identity crises because it will unlock them, because the identities that society like has thrust upon them, these beliefs, are oppressive. And so, like, and man, you look, I know this is all very abstract, I guess, when I'm talking about it, but you look at like the practical outcome of these things. Like, so I recently started back up in restaurants for a couple days a week, right? I noticed I've served a couple like teenage type kids that come in for lunch with their parents or type stuff. A lot of them, man, and I do not remember this even like 10 years ago. A lot of them are insanely, not just socially awkward like some kids are. Like, hell, I was a socially awkward kid, but like unable to connect with people at all. Can't make eye contact, like can't even speak up, can't say anything to them. Like, they're looking at their parents to help them order their food. Like, these kids have zero competency, and I don't even blame them. But you look at the outcome that these kind of programs and ideas are having on these kids, and to me, it's criminal.
I think that a lot of this is coming down to the parents at this point. What's interesting, though, too, is you try to weaponize the system against the parents as well. Because it is like, sorry, you know, a lot of times we talk about the problem. So let's just, a quick solution here is we're identifying this. I'm raising a young kid. I'm going to have more kids. These are things that I'm cognizant of. So I'm going to fix these. Every generation ends up getting stuck with some sort of bad situation. Ours is the economy. Like, I mean, I'm a little older than you, so mine is really the economy. You're close enough. We're close enough in age. So ours is economics. This one behind us is kind of this mental health situation. And the one behind them is all this dangerous ideology, you know what I mean, that they're kind of growing up through and have to break through these things. So what you do when you see these problems are you fix them so that your kids don't have to deal with them. I'm taking care of the economic stuff so my kid won't have the same problems. I identify and see the mental health issues because of a lot of this social media stuff. I'm going to get ahead of that. All this DEI nonsense, that's wildly not going anywhere near my children because you see them, right? So what you do is you identify the problem, then you make sure you make a cognizant effort to raise your kids kind of opposed to all of these bad things that happened. So my kid grows up with financial literacy. So my kid grows up knowing all this stuff is wildly insane. So my kid doesn't have social media till he's 16 or something like that. And then you know how to moderate it and monitor it. And you give him the tools that he needs before then. So if we see these things, it's on the parents right now to make the adjustments. Whether your kid's 10 or 1, it doesn't really make a difference. Get in there now and start trying to correct course because we're the only ones that are going to do it. Because I'm telling you, my kid who's a newborn, basically, he is going to have his own set of problems. And you never know what they are until it's too late. So you want to make sure you button up all the old ones so it doesn't have too much nonsense on their plate.
So yeah, I completely agree that at the end of the day, there needs to be some responsibility from parents to be like, okay, I'm not going to allow my kids to be indoctrinated. But part of the reason that they're so effective at doing so in fooling these parents is because they actually strategize as to how to hide what they're doing from the parents. So for instance, a academic radicalist called Poilievre, he put out something called political knowledge in academic subjects. So what he instructed Marxist teachers to do and these activist teachers to do was to shoehorn these things into curriculums in a way that parents wouldn't be able to see. So for instance, if a parent sees their teacher's curriculum, let's say it's a civics class, and they're like, okay, we're going to be talking about the effects of poverty and those policies and such. Well, he said the political knowledge in this scenario would be to take that topic, poverty, which you would think would just be like, okay, it's the state of being poor. But then he says, okay, this is how you should teach it then, is to be, well, poverty is the state of being made poor by an oppressive capitalist system.
Yes.
And so they shoehorn the Marxist stuff in so that when parents are looking at the curriculum and they just see, okay, this is the discussion for this day, no alarm bells go off, right?
Right.
And even queer theorists put out a thing called on parental resistance and a document called Navigating Parental Resistance, where they advise teachers to camouflage controversial lessons under broader, non-controversial learning objectives to avoid drawing too much attention from concerned parents. And otherwise, they use innocuous sounding lessons as cover for introducing radical ideas into the classroom. Same kind of scenario in this, where it's like, oh, we're just going on a field trip. We're just going on a walk, exposing them. And then all of a sudden, oh, they're in a protest.
Yeah, I think a good way of looking at things generally are, and again, this is a generalization, but if you kind of look at something coming from the conservative perspective, today it's more like capitalism and individual freedom sort of rule. And the problem is an overbearing government. That's kind of the filter that a lot of those ideas come through, right? When you come from the liberal side, today it's more socialism, leaning now towards communism, which is a bit dangerous, obviously. But their filter is blame the capitalistic system and blame corporations. They're the problem. So that's very broad brush. But the reason I say that is if you're taking in information from either side and you want to remain neutral, that's the filter you need to use. So if they're teaching your kids something at school right now, and we know that it's dominated by liberal ideology, That's the filter you have to use, because that's what they're trying to indoctrinate your kids with from a macro level. Obviously, there's all these micro issues as well, but that's kind of the way you got to see everything. It's like everyone's got the dragon they're trying to slay. It's just a matter of like, how do you see the world? A lot of us see it from the right side these days because it's more practical and gives us freedom. But it is important, I think, if you're trying to remain neutral, just to sort of see those two things. Because like you said, no matter what you get from these institutions, there's a spin on it. And I had no idea they were even doing that. That's insane. Here's how you can break down the parents' concerns by fooling them. Great.
Yeah. So yeah, I do agree. The ultimately the responsibility lies on parents, but at this point, it's like the responsibility isn't just. It's like you have to dive into this stuff and actually look deep into your kids' schooling. And yeah, I would highly suggest any listeners head over to our Substack, where I did a full article on the whole queer theory stuff in schools, and so that you can be a little bit more like what these tactics they use are. But moving on to our next story, we've got study exposes legacy media for cheerleading liberal programs while ignoring soaring costs. A Fraser Institute study reveals a clear bias in legacy media, particularly CBC and CTV, for promoting liberal government programs like dental care, pharmacare, and childcare while ignoring their financial burdens on taxpayers. Since 2021, only 4% of coverage has addressed the taxpayer costs, with CBC mentioning long-term financial impacts just 5 times and CTV only twice. Instead, the media focuses on government narratives, political maneuvering, and praising the NDP Liberal coalition. Critics like Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation accuse both the media and government of evading accountability for the costly programs that will burden future taxpayers. So how long would it take for CBC and CTV to close their doors if government funding was pulled?
CBC would be funny, right? Because they would immediately have to liquidate assets, and then a few people would get super rich, and then there'd be some offshoot little media programs, but they'd be gone over. That'd be like gone in the night. You know what I mean? That's the kind of business where, you know, they come in and basically take everything they can in the middle of the night. You go in the office the next day and everything's gone. That's how I see the CBC. And I say that for a couple of reasons. A, because I think they've got no real valuable content to continue providing Canadians with. Other than I think like sometimes they host Hockey Night in Canada, you know, but also just the way that they've operated. You know, firing staff and giving themselves massive bonuses with tax dollars, running at deficits and not adjusting to today's new climate. You know, basically this Catherine Tate woman, she's basically spitting in the face of Canadians with what she's doing. She doesn't
even live in Canada. Eh?
Oh, come on.
No,
that's so bad. Oh man.
I'm gonna fact check myself here, but I'm 90% sure she lives down in.
She to me is kind of like the corporate version of Chrystia Freeland. Like they're both just horrific individuals in how they operate in public and what they're doing based on their track record and what they're doing, right? So CBC, gone quick.
So she lives in Brooklyn, New York in a $5.4 million home.
Oh my God.
Head of Canadian broadcasting.
Not even paying Canadian taxes. Probably some of them, don't get me wrong. CTV, I know a little bit less about their funding structure. I also think that they have done a better job of weaving their way through the political landscape. So I think that CTV would actually be okay. I think they would dial back a significant part of their programming. But I think they've got a model that works effectively. I think they do. I think they would be okay. Plus, if this kind of thing happens, you got to realize too, there will be a demand for it and the supply will go down. So the ones that survive will thrive. They'll do a little better. Deal Bubba Gump Shrimp Co. You know what I mean? If they're the only boat that survives, they're going to get all the business, right? So I think CTV would find their way through it, but I bet they'd cut the political crap pretty quick if they did.
Well, it's a hard one because with CTV, I guess it does show, that they've at least got one alternative voice within their organization, which would be Vasi. She's been great. Like watching her, she'll even tear apart and she goes after all of them. Like she made Andrew Scheer. She was going after him real hard on air. She was going after Jugmeat hard. She's gone after Freeland.
No, yeah, I've watched a couple of hers. She's really good.
She's good.
She is good.
She's got some claws. But then you look at, say, even the scandal last week with CTV and the editing Poilievre clips. Did you see that?
Yeah, they canned a couple people for that. I think that was, I could be wrong, but it hasn't happened to them very much. So there's not been a repeat. That's not been a repeat type of incident for CTV. I think that was renegade editing. I think that was renegade liberal editing. I don't agree with any of it, but do you see what I mean? Like I think they could get through that problem. I don't think that's a death sentence.
So where my head went with that is I remember arguing with a buddy. It was a stupid argument, but it took us like 2 hours to get to the bottom of it. I hate when that happens, but we were discussing about liability within a corporation, whether something falls on the employee or the business owners. So what we were talking about, the context we were talking about was if a server at a restaurant, say, set down a plate that somebody had an allergy to, and that person told them, and whatever, it was their fault. Who's liable for sending that person to the hospital or potentially killing them, the employee or the business? And he was arguing on the side that it's the employee. And I said, in those circumstances, with the way that unfolded, yes, I would argue that that's where the liability falls. But I would also say that restaurant should have a structure in place to make sure that doesn't happen. So for instance, the Keg is very good about this, where as soon as a table tells you that they have an allergy, you say, okay, great, I'm just going to have a manager come over and take the rest of your order.
Yeah.
They come over because they know every single menu item, every single allergy. Then they go to the kitchen, they discuss with the chef, they say this table has this allergy, blah, 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 blah. And then that manager has to run that food.
Right.
So they add a process in to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, they do the best they can.
So the argument I would make here is, okay, who is still responsible for that? The renegade editors that say, yes, did something that slipped something in under it? Or is it the fault of CTV for not having the proper system in place to make sure that nothing like that would get to air?
Well, it's clearly CTV. It's both, right? So if you want to go, I give you an objective answer to your problem there. If it comes to alcohol, if you overserve someone and they hurt themselves, so that goes 3 people. It hits, 3 levels. It goes server or bartender, manager, and business. So it hits all 3, actually. That's how the liability sort of trickles down. I believe it's the same here. I think CTV should be held accountable for their actions. Absolutely, absolutely. But again, if government funding stopped, which was your question, how would they fare? They would be okay. I don't agree with what's happened, and I think they should take it on the chin for this. I think they should totally take it on the chin for this, 100%. It's ridiculous. I mean, conservatives, I think Poilievre said he would basically boycotted CTV until there was some sort of either accountability, apology, whatever it may be. And I think that they've seen their way through that. And it's good that you do things like that because you sort of make them pay the piper for what happened. You know what I mean? Like, do you still want to be a part of the political conversation with the conservatives who are going to run the country? Then fix this mistake now. I like that. You're forcing accountability. Totally on board. Yeah, I think you'd see a couple of the big ones drop, CBC being one of the biggest ones for sure. I think you'd probably see some newspapers fall apart pretty quickly too. Toronto Star would probably be gone pretty fast. But again, I think a lot of them, it's like let's put it this way. If you're in the business of selling media, selling space, doing something like that, but the government's already paying you, I'm already making my money. My operation's already going pretty smooth. I'm not really too worried. I have a full client list, as maybe easier to explain. I got a full client list. I don't need anybody else. But if your big clients go, hey, we're out of here in the next 6 months, you go, okay, I got to find another way to bring in some money. I got to fill my client list in another way. CTV would fill their client list. CBC, like I said, gone in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and I think that was actually a really good move by Poilievre to just say, all right, I'm not allowing anyone in my cabinet to work with this or to communicate with this organization until they fix this issue. And I think probably a lot of the conservatives would be like the conservative in the general population would be hesitant to give credence to that apology or to accept it and just kind of want Poilievre to continue to say fuck you to CTV. But this kind of goes to that tit for tat thing that I was talking to you about, is kind of how I like to operate with people in every scenario, which is you go into a situation assuming that the other person is going to engage with you fairly.
Yeah.
When they don't, then you tit for tat them. You return the aggression or whatever, but then you reset yourself and allow them to come back to the table. Because otherwise, in that reset yourself and allow them to come back and then operate and assume that they're going to operate on good faith again, that stops a death spiral of an eye for an eye scenario, right?
I agree with that perspective in business. Depending how bad it is, if someone's doing something really bad, like stealing from you, there's no like, get the fuck out of here. There's some red lines. I agree. If they don't cross one of the red lines, I'm on the same page. When it comes to physical violence, I don't agree. If you push me, I'm going to take your head off. I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm out. I'm just out.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to push you back. I'm going to go until one of us isn't moving. Just kind of how I see the world with physical violence. Don't do it. You better be ready if you're going to do that to people. I don't put my hands on people. No chance. So for me, I guess that whole thing's a bit of a red line, but I agree with the business side of things. I think you find something that is reciprocate in some sort of equal fashion, so it's understood. But yeah, no, I think it's important that he brings CTV back to the table. Otherwise, he will come across as a petulant child, and he'll make himself a target of CTV, which you don't want. Ultimately, they, like I said, go, well, he's probably going to be the next prime minister. We still want to be in this political conversation, and ultimately, we made the mistake. He's giving us an opportunity. Let's repair that and let's be better. And I think you almost build an ally in going, hey, you get a slap back in the business sense. Let's get back to the table here. I think you can sort of build a stronger relationship with them when you do that effectively.
Yeah. And I think across the board, whether it's this scenario or just in general, I think that's so important, is to allow them to come back. And it doesn't mean that you would just, again, if they did it again, that you would just allow that to go unnoticed. But it's like, you do have to return to that idea where it's like, okay, I'm not going to continue to force you to be my enemy.
No, I think like you said, I think in the lion's share of situations, diplomacy and finding a way back to being neutral with one another is always going to be the best solution.
All right. Anything else you wanted to add for today? No,
that's everything. That was a tight hour and 5 minutes today.
Beautiful. All right. Don't forget to head over to our Substack, where you can find original articles, exclusive podcasts, and a direct line to Jonathan and myself. And for those of you who don't, we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.